Welcome to AFI DOCS Film Festival, presented by AT&T. I'm Michael Lumpkin, the Director of AFI Festivals. Thank you for joining us. I also want to thank those who support the festival, our presenting sponsor, AT&T, all of our many supporters and donors, AFI members, and you, our audience. We're here today with the Director of DADS, Bryce Dallas Howard. DADS is her feature film debut as a director, so congratulations on that, Bryce, and welcome to AFI DOCS.
Hello.
Welcome.
Thank you. Thank you so much.
I want to start with the start of the film and what brought you to the subject of making a documentary on dads. What brought you to that? What was the inspiration?
Well, it was a few different things. I mean, from a kind of like emotional standpoint, the reason why for me was because my grandfather had passed away the year prior to me starting this movie, and he was just a genius of a father. And for his generation, my impression was for his generation that was something that was, uncommon. And because of his good parenting, he changed the course of our family's legacy. And so that's something that had been on my mind, like, this kind of generational, passing on of parenting, good parenting, all of that. I should say healthy parenting, constructive parenting. And I, in terms of this actual project, Unilever, which is the company, they own a lot of different brands, but they, in particular, own Dove and Dove Men Plus Care. And Dove Men Plus Care has done a lot of initiatives around supporting fathers, and in particular, modern fathers. And they were doing, most recently, they were doing an initiative around paternity leave and making paternity leave available to fathers. But what they learned and what they shared with me eventually was that a huge percentage of fathers who are given paid paternity leave do not take it. And this is not just an America problem. This is a global problem. So what's going on when paternity leave is available and fathers aren't taking it? Well, there's a stigma around fathers being caregivers. And the notion is that if a father is staying home and taking care of his young babies instead of going to work, that he's lazy or not hardworking or not providing for the family or something. And that's just like completely ass backwards. And so Unilever and Dove Men Plus Care wanted to make a feature documentary film about modern fathering. And so I was one of the filmmakers that they were talking with. And I went in there and was just really curious as to why they wanted to make the documentary, learned many things, one of which I just shared with you. And in the room, I just, and going in, I wasn't like, oh gosh, I've just got to nail this job. Like, I really wasn't sure what they wanted and whether or not I would be the right filmmaker. I mean, it's a given. I'm not a dad, so myself. So, I had a lot of curiosity. Yeah. And so in the room, I kind of pitched back to them what I envisioned, which is I said, our stand-up comedians, in my perspective, they're really our modern day philosophers, and fathers who are stand-up comedians look at their lives through a lens of comedy. And so I felt like, okay, if we could interview fathers who were these comedians, and they could kind of be our Greek chorus, and then take a crew and go to families around the globe, a handful of families, and get an inside look as to what it takes to be a modern father today. In Japan, in Brazil, in the US. And if the budget had allowed, I would have gone to many, many more places around the globe. And this is like what I pitched in the room. I was just like, I want to profile dads. I especially am curious about the daddy blogger community, because that's a new community, relatively new community. And I was immensely curious. I also knew that they are, a lot of those dads themselves are musicians or filmmakers, are artists, and are capturing their families' day-to-day lives in a way that's genuinely cinematic. And so I just, in the room, because they wanted this documentary to happen within the course of a year. So just in the room, I was like, yeah, comedians and dads. And then I mentioned, I was like, and maybe my grandfather who passed away last year, I had interviewed him a few years ago, and there might be something in there. And literally my dad instantly shot that down. Like, was like, no, 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 no. You're not gonna have our family in this movie. And I was like, okay. But then it evolved. Yes.
Yeah. So speaking of your dad, so you started your career in film acting, and then have moved into directing. Your father took a very similar path. And actually here at the festival this year, we're honoring an Oscar-winning actress, Lee Grant, who herself, back in the 1980s, moved into documentary directing herself. So this happens frequently, but for you, what about working as an actor and that experience led you to directing or inspired you to move into directing?
I'm going to steal a little bit of some stuff that I've heard from Jon Favreau in getting to work with Jon Favreau on Mandalorian. And he had that same journey, actor, writer, director, and producer. And he said some things that were I was like, oh yes, that is true. That is accurate. Before I share that, what I'll say is that I was really lucky growing up because I got to always be on movie sets. And I wanted to be on set constantly. That was the carrot that my parents could dangle to get optimal behavior out of me, was like, oh, if you misbehave, you're not going to be allowed to go to set tomorrow. And so that's all I wanted. But I wasn't necessarily near the actors. I was always near the crew. I was always near, the ADs, the PAs, the camera crew, sound department, that, what production office. That's what, in my mind, that was what, filmmaking really, movie making really was. Where the actors, I had, I felt totally safe and comfortable around them and everything, but they were doing their thing. That wasn't something where anyone was going to be cool with a little kid being like, hey, I'm going to hang out with you and distract you right now. So I didn't have a lot of exposure to acting as a kid, kind of surprisingly. And then when I went to NYU and I was studying drama, I had actually started doing this in high school. I started directing plays. And so while I was studying acting, I was on the side directing kind of these little black box theater shows that I would put on myself with my friends. And I did a version of No Exit in the subway. We had to move 3 times because we didn't have the right permitting. I really tried though. And I did a version of, I did This Is Our Youth. Years later, I met Kenny Lonergan, and I was like, thank you so much for giving a student from NYU permission to do your play, because I really needed permission from you, and you gave it to me, and you had no idea who you were giving it to. And I just wrote a play that I directed, just kind of kept doing that. And while I was studying acting, and then once my acting career kind of really kicked off, that was definitely my focus, but I was still writing and developing, and then directed my first short film when I was pregnant with my first child, and then my second short film when I was pregnant with my second child. And then after that, I was able to continue to direct every single year. And then just these last couple of years, actually consciously shifted to directing full time. And it was more okay, before I was acting full time and I was fitting in the filmmaking in there when it was possible. And now it's kind of in my mind flipped a little bit. Yeah. So it was always my intention to direct. I always was directing. but it didn't, like the sort of like 20 years into my career, having my first feature film is definitely a little surprising to me, because I would have thought, you know, maybe just given the curiosity and the interest, that maybe I would have had or done a longer form earlier. But it's been awesome getting to do all of these short films and stuff. And I am acutely aware that I have not shared with you the Jon Favreau thing. Do you mind if I share that with you? So I'm long-winded. I told you I was chatty at the beginning, Michael. What Jon shared, when I got the job to direct for season 1 in Mandalorian, I had for a few years at that point been working or specializing in emerging technology and testing cameras. And I specifically worked with Canon camera to do that. And then got very, very interested in VR and mocap and all of that. And I actually like took all these classes on how to like write for video games, like got super into that world. And then ended up with this incredible opportunity to direct. And I kind of assumed that Jon Favreau knew that I had that history. But he didn't. I was like, oh, I got the job because I'm interested in tech. And that wasn't a factor at all in me being hired. What the main reason, as it occurred to me as to why I was hired, was because Jon knew that actors are really at the center of kind of the key decision-making moments that happen in the filmmaking process. And so to be able to be privy to what that experience is like, kind of like at the center of the film, and to see like, okay, if the scene isn't working, this is how you solve it. If the tech is breaking, this is how long it's going to take, and this is the things you can do to work around it. It's like kind of the problem solving that is at the essence of filmmaking is something that actors are privy to more than anyone, because the frequency with which we work is much more than the frequency with which directors can work in terms of, you know, the volume of projects.
Yeah.
And so as an actor, you know, it's normal for you to see how many directors solve these problems. And so if you can have that in your toolkit and be immersed in something that is basically, oh, that's my phone. I'm so sorry. That's my cell phone is off, but not my home line. If you can have the ability to be in a state of kind of wondering, like, I don't know how I'm going to solve this, but I know the people to go to, and I know the team, and I know the infrastructure that's in place in order to solve this. That's something that actors are privy to. And Jon knew, I mean, also like I had to like, you know, essentially audition for the job. I had to talk with him and all that kind of stuff. But I think at its essence, he knew that I had been privy to that, and that in this kind of a process with Mandalorian would be an asset, because it was dealing with emerging technology, and so much of the job was about problem solving. So I think that must have been kind of part of it too, just loving that process and getting to see it happen again and again and again, and learning from people, and then wanting to take on more and more responsibility.
Yeah. So as an actor, you're in the middle of it constantly. Like how it works, how it doesn't work, how it gets fixed. That's amazing. Kind of speaking of acting, I wanted to ask you about the casting of the documentary. Casting is not referred to that often in the making of documentaries, but that's very much, you know, part of that process of finding the right subjects that are going to help you tell the story. And, you know, you have two distinct groups in your film. You have the stand-up comedians, and then you have the other fathers.
Yeah, I call them our hero dads.
Hero, that's good. Yes.
Comedian dads and hero dads.
So how did you go about, I want to hear about the hero dads and how you found those amazing men and their great stories. I mean, and them being all over the world.
Yeah. So the hero dad stories, the most challenging aspect of that was honestly narrowing it down. There are so many great dads out there. I mean, it's like I had an idea of it because I went into this with sort of like this inner like thesis statement of like, there are like the majority of fathers are engaged, extraordinary caregivers. The tiny minority are not. And yet that's what I'm seeing depicted on media and in shows and all of that, like the bumbling fathers, or the fathers who don't want to take responsibility or whatever. Like that's what I see depicted more often than not, when actually the reality is that the majority of dads are amazing and not really being acknowledged for that. And so I went into this with that assumption, and yet I was blown away with receiving all of these stories, reading about them, witnessing them, watching them, being sent them, stories of fathers around the globe who are actual heroes. Like they are literal heroes. They go so above and beyond what I could ever imagine I myself doing as a parent. And they do it with grace and integrity and humor. And it's awesome. It was awesome to see all of these dads. And so, so narrowing it down was really challenging. Some fun little specifics, because I wanted to essentially infiltrate the daddy blogger community. Glenn Belief Henry was one of the first fathers who we connected with, who has a wonderful platform, YouTube channel, Belief in Fatherhood, and is a musician himself, a stay-at-home dad. And he actually did a really remarkable TED Talk, which for me kind of crystallized, okay, this is what we want to depict, this journey that he articulates in the TED Talk of, you know, being a dad who would never kind of consider being a stay-at-home father as a possibility, to finding out that that was his calling. And I wanted to ensure as well that 50% of our hero dads were stay-at-home fathers, and 50% of our hero dads were working dads. And so just, you know, with those sort of parameters, that's how we started to just kind of, you know, the Rob and Reese Shear have a book that they wrote. Shuichi, there was a comic that was written about him that one of the producers found. There's a producer named Elizabeth Jameson who was really focused on this in particular, on finding, you know, all of these fathers and helping to narrow it down. Something that my dad has always said to me about directing, that has always stuck with me and that I agree with, is that 80% of your job as a director is to cast the right people. That is 80% of your job. And that is certainly the case with documentary filmmaking. I think the thing that's most important is to find individuals where you just vet it so thoroughly, you know that anything that you get is going to be okay, because this person is actually like what they claim to be, who they claim to be is who they are. And that's the, you know, that would be the scariest thing as a filmmaker, if you show up and then you're like, like, no, this is not pretend. Like, we're not going to create a performance here. Like, this is just about capturing what is authentic and true and genuine. So all our dads were that and then some.
Great. So in your film, there's like one of the great stories that Will Smith tells about trying to figure out how to set up his new TV.
Picture-in-picture television, yeah.
1,000-page manual, and then his child is being born. And coming back, you know, like from that experience, like there's a 1,000-page manual for the TV. There's nothing for this, for being a parent, for being a dad. And at that point in the film, I was struck just, you know, I think it was very stealth, I think, of your kind of how you constructed the story, but the film is really an instruction manual, I think, for dads in many ways. Was that your intent for this?
Bingo. Yes, yes. But I didn't, and I love that you used the word stealth, because that was something that was really important, was to not, for this to not be in any way, shape, or form didactic. Because who am I to preach? I'm not a father. I'm just observing, these men in their natural habitat. What I realized, and here's something that just continues to kind of blow me away, is that there is no rite of passage for men becoming fathers. Zero. There's baby showers for women. There's versions of baby showers for women all over the globe. There's no rite of passage for men. There's no acknowledgement that their life is about to change dramatically and permanently, and that they deserve and need a community around them holding that space for that transformation to occur. And during filming, I kept saying, we need an expecting father. We've got to have an expecting father as one of the characters. And I swear, this was not, I couldn't have controlled this, but my brother and his wife, they weren't even trying. They got pregnant during filming. And so Reed, my brother, became my expecting father. And so as a big sister, I'm that much more invested in him doing well and him feeling supported, and of course Ashley as well. And it's then when I was like, while I was filming, I remember the moment I was in the basement with my brother and my dad, and it's like you see some of the scenes where my dad shows my grandfather's boots and stuff like that. That was actually, I was there operating the camera. That was during Ashley's baby shower, which was happening upstairs. And I was filming the baby shower. And then at a certain point, my brother showed up and was like, oh, no, I'm not supposed to be here. I'm sorry. And I kept filming. And then I was like, where's Reed? And my mom was like, oh, he's in the basement with your father. I was like, oh, okay, I'm going to go down there and film them. And they were, playing an arcade game and all that kind of stuff and hanging out and talking. And I was filming them. And it was there, then and there, that it occurred to me that there was no rite of passage. And that, if I wasn't asking those questions of my brother, perhaps that space wouldn't have been made for my brother, other than going to like a birthing class or something of that sort, for him to actually step into this role of being a father in a way that is claiming it and having ownership, as opposed to like, I guess I'm a dad. Which I would imagine, if I didn't have all the fanfare that I did during pregnancy leading up to having a baby, it would have been difficult for me to wrap my mind around it as well. And still it was difficult for me to wrap my mind around becoming a parent. So that's the instruction manual part of it. In looking around and talking to dads and sort of asking what, if they could have anything that that didn't exist out there currently, that is what they said again and again and again. And it's absurd that there isn't more guidance in terms of how to be a healthy, successful caregiver in general, but for sure that doesn't exist for men, for sure. Yeah. And my brother is an incredible father, in part because that's what was modeled for him, in part because that's what was modeled for my own dad. It shouldn't just be reliant upon your parents like teaching you or modeling that. Like, we need to create a society where we can really support fathers in this essential role that they have in a child's life, which is an equal role to the mothers.
Yeah. Great. So your film is playing here at AFI DOCS today. It'll be available till midnight Eastern time. So if you're watching and haven't seen the film, check it out. And it's debuting on Apple TV Plus tomorrow, June 19th, correct?
Yeah.
It'll be available on Apple, which I think is a great way to send us into Father's Day weekend. So thank you for letting us include the film, and thanks for being here today.
Thank you so much. This means so much to me. And I need to mention that my mom is an AFI grad. Very,
Yes.
very proud. Andre Lascaris, our DP of this movie, an AFI grad. It's an incredible institution. And I am so grateful for all the artists who come out of that program.
Oh, thank you. Thank you. Thanks for joining us. Bye.
Thank you. Appreciate it, Michael. Thank you. Okay, bye.